When I was 3 years old, I was at play school. It was probably about the same time of year as now, so December. It was the end of term. And my parents were invited to watch me collect my certificate to show how good I'd been at playing that year. So all the parents were there, the children came to pick up their certificate. So they said, Aristos, come and pick up your certificate. He gets his and goes back to his seat. And Michael, please come and pick up your certificate. And when it was my turn, I was so excited and I jumped out of my chair and I skipped towards the teacher to get my certificate. And she said, Anna, go back and walk properly. And my face just fell, my shoulders slumped, and I shuffled back to my seat. Got up, walked properly, got my certificate, and walked back to my seat. And I don't know what school systems are like in Greece, but this kind of strict approach is very common in England. I remember a few years later I was in Form 2, so probably 6 or 7 years old, and I was fiddling with my pencil case and I broke my ruler by accident. And the teacher, Mrs. Coyle, made me stand on my chair for the rest of the class. My mum kept all of my exercise books, so in the attic I have piles and piles of books from every single class from primary school, from when I was 4 to 18, and even all my university things. And I was recently quite curious to discover all the comments from the teachers. So of course they have the famous red pen, and the comments said, good girl Anna, good job, gold star, smiley face sticker, but of course also the negative criticism, so not good enough, not up to your usual standard, we expect more from you, and things like, oh, too many mistakes and too much crossing out, you need to be neat, you need to stay within the lines, you need to get it right the first time. And this kind of sort of good girl, walking properly conditioning, of course shaped me throughout this time, and I became a good girl and I did as I was told. So I did very well at school. I was valedictorian at high school, which in American schools means you have the highest grade point average. I went to Oxford University. I did my master's in Geneva in Switzerland, at the same university that Kofi and Anne studied. It was the good girl sort of expected path. And I didn't realise it at the time, but when I looked back, I realised I'd been on this conveyor belt. And I was moving forward, but I wasn't really looking where I was going. It was sort of, I could walk a bit faster, I could overtake some people, I could stop and move a bit slower, but I wasn't really choosing proactively where I was going. And this all came to a head in 2013. For some reason, I'm still not entirely sure why, but I got up the courage to ask my boss for a sabbatical, and she said yes. So I took 3 months out of my job to travel by myself in South America. And it was the most amazing experience, and of course the best decision I've ever made. The people I met, the places I went, I mean, Machu Picchu had always been on my bucket list, and it was such a fantastic experience to be there. And I spent my time reading and imagining all the wonderful things I could do and all the possibilities. And then halfway through that, my boss actually called up and started talking about next assignments when I got back, and I had a bit of a crisis, and I cried and I talked to everybody I knew, and finally I actually called up HR and I quit. And it can seem like quite an irresponsible decision, and certainly a lot of people told me so. My parents, my inner good girl, was very uncomfortable with leaving the stable job, the salary, the good job title, the colleagues, the friends. It wasn't just a job, it was a life I'd created. I lived in Geneva in Switzerland for 9 years, packed all my stuff into boxes, moved to who knows what, I had no plan at all. But I can honestly say it's, again, the best decision I've ever made so far. And I certainly have never regretted it. In fact, when people ask me what's your biggest achievement, I say it's when I quit my job, which is a ridiculous idea that could be an achievement, but for me, certainly that's true. And since then, travel has been a big part of my life the last 3 or 4 years. I'm nomadic, so I don't actually live anywhere at the moment. I've been moving around while working, while trying to sort of create that lifestyle and work that's really aligned to who I am and what I want to do. So I've paddleboarded in the Mississippi and kayaked down the Thames, and I've eaten pizza in Naples and sushi in Japan and done karaoke and all these things. But of course, it's not just the travel. Travel by itself is just a holiday. So it's really about, as I said, the life I'm trying to create. And honestly, I'm working harder now than I was when I was in that job. So it's not to say that I am sitting on a beach somewhere with my laptop and enjoying life. I'm certainly working very hard and continuing to do that. So to tell you a bit more about who I am, I guess, professionally, that job that I escaped from was a marketing career at Procter & Gamble. So I worked in perfume on big brands like Hugo Boss and Lacoste, Gucci. I also consulted on some of the other sort of core category brands that we have, so Gillette and Pantene and some really big names, and P&G, is a big name in the FMCG and marketing industry. And when I first left, I started by working with similar big companies, so I did what I knew. I did marketing consulting for people like IBM and Burberry and so on. And the latest phase, the last year or so, I'm trying to create, if you've heard the term, the portfolio career, so I have lots of interests and passions and skills, I hope. So I'm trying to create something that addresses that. So I continue to do the marketing consulting, but with entrepreneurs and startups. I do now career coaching, so I'm, of course, super passionate about helping other people ask themselves what success looks like for them and have the courage to go out and pursue that. And I also work with companies to help them to train up people coming in and make sure there's a match between the individual and the career. And in fact, I'm trying increasingly to catch people earlier, so I'm going to schools and universities now to help them before they make the mistakes that some of us have made, actually. So hopefully that's addressing it before the problem develops. But enough about me, I'm here to talk about you, and we're talking about redefining what success looks like. I'm going to look at sort of the definition of that word, which I think is a good place to start. And then actually end with some very concrete exercises that we're going to do together. Hopefully wake up before the lunch break, and so you walk away with something concrete and maybe some new insights that you haven't considered. But first of all, I wanted to ask you, do you remember where you wanted to be when you were little? Yes, I wanted to be an astronaut. I'm very claustrophobic, so it probably wasn't a great idea, but I do like the stars and the idea of being out in space. Does anyone remember what they wanted to be? Yes? Football player, good one.
Pilot.
A pilot, okay. Ballerina, vet, doctor, superhero, that's a good one. And who's actually doing the job today that they dreamed of when they were little? Hooray! Congratulations. I see 1, 2, 3. Is that a hand? 4? Yes, you told me yesterday. So actually, statistics say about 6% are doing the job that they want to do when they're little, as much as 30%, which sounds quite high to me. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, I don't think I'm a failure because I'm not an astronaut, and we certainly redefine what success looks like as we get older. But it's interesting to see how that disconnect evolves. And it's always good to start with a dictionary definition to understand what we're talking about. And this is the first thing that comes up when you Google success. And it's the accomplishment of an aim or a purpose, which of course inherently in that definition is what that aim or purpose is. And often we haven't defined what that is. And in my case, and I think in many people's case, we've inherited this definition from our parents, friends, TV, society, country norms, global, whatever it is, but we have this inherited idea, aim or purpose, that we haven't really explicitly looked at to see if that is something that really fits with what we want to achieve. So I thought we're in Greece, so I thought I'd go all the way back to ancient Greece, and I discovered that the ancient Greek word for work, ponos, is actually linked to the Latin word poena, which is torment and pain and sorrow. So for the ancient Greeks and for the Romans, of course, they had slaves, so manual labour was very much something that was looked down on. It wasn't something that we should be doing. Well, women certainly, I don't think, they were probably on the level of slaves, but gentlemen would maybe do some philosophy or art, warfare, big commerce, but work itself was not something that was important to them. And the ultimate goal really was to retire into a life of leisure, and actually leisure was really admired and something that was thought to give you more morality and wisdom. So I see sort of images of lying, with the grapes feeding you, and that actually makes you very much more moral and wise. So next time you do that, you can tell people around you that that's what you're aspiring to. And that definition lasted for a long time, I think, into medieval times and so on, until we have the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. So people like Max Weber, who introduced the concept of a Protestant work ethic. and work became much more central. It was about punctuality and diligence, and that was really at the core now of the life. And people like Martin Luther, who said that to work was to serve God. And you certainly shouldn't try to change your career, because that's going against the social hierarchy of God's will. So if your parents are carpenters, then of course you should continue on that path, and you definitely shouldn't break into a different world. God forbid you should try to be an entrepreneur, I think, if your parents are corporate, for example. Then we're coming closer to what we perhaps recognise, so the Industrial Revolution. Industrialisation brought artificial lighting, so we can now work longer hours, working hard in the factories. It's not as seasonal as before agriculture. We had actually a lot of time off when we weren't doing all the agricultural work, whereas now you can work all year round. The identity of the work has really kind of dissipated, and you became an anonymous cog in the wheel. So I think this picture is even from Ford's factory, and of course that's the famous production line where you work on this tiny little piece of the puzzle. There's very little self-expression or fulfillment. Again, it's about punctuality. You punch in the morning, you punch out, and that's sort of the diligence and the hard work that we saw during that period. Then, perhaps the most familiar picture of success. The working week actually declined after the Second World War, with trade unions and legislation coming in. And so after the Second World War, we had the 9 to 5 concept, the 40 hours, which was actually less than people have been working before. And I think those of us who have worked in a corporate environment probably have never actually worked 9 to 5, and certainly here in Greece, I think we work much later. But this is perhaps the picture that we've inherited from our parents. So it's the principle that we work hard, we're rewarded, we're promoted, we're loyal to the company, they'll be loyal back to us. We'll be rewarded, we'll get our pension, and then we can live happily ever after. And I think for many of us that's not the ideal that we strive for. I loved what you were saying before, Rachel, about that actually retiring is not good for our brain, and certainly we should continue to learn and continue to work, which is fantastic. I'm glad I'm backed up by neuroscience. And so this picture is not something, and it's also not something that's necessarily possible anymore. With pensions declining, with unemployment, with less loyalty from the system, I think we need to rethink that concept. The final one I wanted to throw in there, and I hinted at it before, was this kind of digital nomad laptop on the beach idea. So we have people like Tim Ferriss with a 4-hour work week, with the concept that you work as little as possible, create passive income, and then you can go off and learn tango or whatever you want to do. And it's not about meaningful work, actually. It's really just, sell any kind of product, generate income, and go off and live your happy life. Maybe we're coming back to kind of the ancient Greek Latin ideals of that leisure, and we're becoming more wise and so on. But unfortunately, maybe I shouldn't say unfortunately, we don't have slaves anymore, so there's still work that needs to be done. So we have to kind of marry those two things. And of course, there's lots of talk about millennials. I am actually a millennial, although I'm, I guess, at the tail end of the generation. And I'm sure you're so familiar with these statistics. We get them from every corner of the world every day. We're talking about millennials and post-millennial generations. But of course, it's things like purpose becoming much more important over, for example, salary. We're on average only staying 2 years in a company rather than that job for life that we saw in the past. Entrepreneurial spirits. So whether or not we've started a business, I think 90% of people actually want to and will do at some point. And they're the most educated generation, which is positive. And of course, it means that the university degree maybe is not some of its value. If everybody is super highly educated, then you wonder how does that fit in with your competitiveness in the market. And of course, the flexible working arrangements too is very appealing. But it's not just millennials. And I think, I'll turn to people who are not millennials, I think there are 3 drivers for job satisfaction. I think they apply to everybody, and these things we've mentioned, like purpose and enjoying your work, I think are human endeavours and not just this single millennial generation. So 3 drivers. Number 1 is that it's aligned with your personal values. And if you think creativity is really important for you, or independence, or maybe stability and security, or prestige and money, that's so important to align that with the job you're doing, and you're definitely going to be unhappy if there's a mismatch between what you think is important and what you're actually doing. The second one really creates a win-win for employers, because of course if you're good at a job, you're going to enjoy it much more, and you'll also deliver better work. So the employer will very much benefit from you being good at the job that you're doing and being motivated within that. And finally, and perhaps the most important one, is that there is a meaning, where we call it a purpose or a mission, making a concrete impact. And I love that link then to what Miguel was saying with the bigger picture of businesses as well making an impact. So if we go back to me at Procter & Gamble, I have to say I loved that job. I met so many fantastic people, I learned so much, and it opened so many doors for me. But ultimately I was marketing perfume. And some people said, oh, you're selling smelling water. Not very meaningful. Some people said, oh, but you're selling the dream, because of course you have this world of celebrities and the beautiful women and the hot man. And some people I remember said that you're helping teenagers have sex. So that's also, one mission that you can connect with. Personally, I didn't feel any of those were sort of my big mission in life. So of course that disconnect then made me really unhappy, even though on the surface I had everything that I thought I wanted. There was that disconnect. So that's incredibly important. But of course we're not operating in a vacuum. So we have things going on here in Greece and the world, and that's something we need to be very sensitive to. And this is not new, I think it's just happening more quickly. Of course we have big established industries that are being disrupted by the famous examples, Airbnb and Uber. Technology, of course, today we're talking about big data, virtual reality, augmented reality, self-driving cars, AI. It's completely changing, transforming careers and jobs as we know it. And in fact, as much as 80% of jobs that exist today are not going to exist in 20 years. So it's incredibly difficult to plan a career within that uncertainty. On the positive side, so many people now have access to the internet. You can be in Ghana and have access to the same kind of courses that we do have here at Thessaloniki, and that's a huge opportunity as well. And of course we're living longer, so that whole retirement piece becomes a bit of a challenge as well. And it can seem with these big changes, adding on, we were talking about the emotional things that are happening in the world, in the US, Brexit, of course, the popular topic in the UK. These seem like really big things, unemployment, the economic crisis, that we can't affect. And we had Naomi talking before about the importance of being proactive and the circle of influence change within that environment. So we can choose to say, oh, you know what, there's nothing I can do, bad economic situation, I can't get a good job, and then just sort of stumble along. Or we can look at, okay, within that context, what can I do to position myself in the best way possible to take advantage of and maybe even create opportunities for myself within that environment. So I've talked very generally, I've done ancient Greek history and trends and so on, and now, as I said, I want to get a bit more concrete. And hopefully you have a pen and paper or you have a phone, so digital these days, and I'll give you a little exercise for each of the questions, just to sort of give you something, as I said, really concrete to walk away with. And hopefully to practice some things in the lunch break as well. So the first one, and I think it's no surprise that I'm saying this is the most important thing, is to define what success looks like for you. And I have a few little ways of doing this. Perhaps you're super clear on it, in which case fantastic. And if you're working on that definition already, then I'm really, really happy for you. I think you're in the minority, but it's great, some people are. So the first one is imagining what your ideal day looks like. So it's thinking about, the alarm clock rings in the morning, or maybe it doesn't, maybe you hate alarm clocks and you just want to sleep naturally. What do you do when you wake up? What do you eat for breakfast? Who are you with? Are you alone? Are you with other people? Where are you? I don't know, what's the view out of the window? What's the first thing you're going to do? Are you sitting at your laptop by yourself indoors? Are you outside with other people and moving about? And just as much detail as you can. If you're a very visual person, you can really get into the sort of smell and the sounds and everything, and really imagine what that day looks like. And it can be quite eye-opening, because sometimes we think we really want to be an entrepreneur in our own business, but I meet people who hate working by themselves. They actually want more time with their family and so on, and sometimes there's, a disconnect between the sort of ideal of maybe astronaut, for example. I think I want to be an astronaut, but actually I don't want to do all the exercise, I'm not very good at maths, I'm claustrophobic, it probably isn't the best match. So understanding, how you want to spend your time and if that fits in your ideal. So if you know that you really value creative independence and innovation and entrepreneurship and all those things, that's a very different picture to the stability and security, or I mentioned prestige and money. And there's no judgment here, by the way. It's important, and you don't have to share with other people what's important to you. Just know what it is and be intentional about it. And finally, this is the one I'm going to get you to do now, just a couple of minutes, is the rocking chair exercise. So if you fast forward into your life, when you're 85, 90 years old, you're sitting in the old people's home, you're looking back on your life and thinking, yes, I remember when I was in Greece in 2016. What needs to have happened over your life for you to feel, yeah, I've been successful? What do you need to have done? Do you want to have published a book? And you can start writing if you have an idea now while I'm talking. Do you want to have earned a certain amount of money? Do you want to have lived in particular countries or travelled and seen certain bucket list destinations? Do you want to have started a family? Do you want 7 children? Create a one-track musical orchestra? What is it that's important to you? What needs to have happened when you're older for you to feel like you've had a successful life? And maybe imagine your 85-year-old self coming back to the present day and giving you advice as well. What would they say to you? I see nobody writing, so obviously you either have a really clear idea that you're going to remember later, or you don't like this exercise, so we'll see. Okay. The second one is forget about the conventional career path. And I think within the entrepreneurial community, probably we're already a little bit outside of that, but we've talked a lot about this one-directional, single, conventional job for life. And that's just not a reality anymore, and it certainly doesn't fit with a lot of our preferences or the environment in which we operate. So it's actually a good thing. It means we don't have to find the career, capital C, that we have to love and enjoy for the rest of our life. And we can really think in terms of sort of smaller building blocks and what's the next thing you want to work on. So it can be experiments, and the only way you'll know if you like something, if you go back to that person who wants to be an entrepreneur, is to try it. So get an internship or shadow someone or talk to someone within that industry. Try to get the experience and don't just sit in your room sort of theoretically planning for the next career move. And think about the next step you want to take. So what's the one thing when you get out of this room, when you go home tomorrow, one day, what is the one thing that you want to do next in your career that's going to challenge you, that's going to move you forwards to that big picture goal that you have? If you want to write a book, for example, probably a good step is to first start writing, or to research what it takes to get a publisher or something like that. So think about what's the one next step. Whatever point at which you're at in your career, you could be thinking that you're nearing retirement, you could be 25 and you have your whole future ahead of you. It doesn't matter. One more step to continue learning and using your neuro cells and things, whatever they're called. The third one is, and this is a really important one for me, taking ownership for your own training and development. So one of my values is personal growth and development, and we talked about lifelong learning and constantly evolving. I'm always learning a new language, I've learned to play the ukulele, I'm constantly challenging myself, whether it's a fun thing or something within work. But don't think in terms of fancy qualifications. So often people tend to go, oh, I need to do an MBA, or I'm going to go and do a PhD. No, we don't need that. I mean, apart from the fact that everybody now has degrees, and I said, it's less valuable perhaps. There's so much available. There are online courses and these MOOCs and free courses, courses to pay for. There's so much information available, in fact, that you can skill up without paying for a fancy qualification. If you find that there's a degree program that absolutely matches what you want and you're going into a career that requires that, of course, by all means, but again, it's about being intentional about what are you going to do with that. Don't just do an MBA for an MBA's sake. And then finally, thinking in terms of, so don't just think job title, think of, for example, in my case, marketing is actually, digital marketing in particular, is hugely in demand, and I can apply that in lots of different industries. Programming, coding. Ali talked in the big data before about curiosity. I love that. Curiosity is a great skill to have. So think of those types of skills rather than the traditional. Or don't put Microsoft Word and Excel in your CV. It's not needed anymore. That's assumed. So it's really about those sort of higher value skills that you're bringing to the table. The next one, personal branding, is something that people can feel is quite icky. But the truth is that we all have a personal brand out there. There is some kind of online footprint, and we have a choice of whether we want to manage it or not. So the first thing, of course, is understanding what you want to stand for. What is the personal brand? And this is not about lying. It's not about creating a fake identity. It's just being very clear on who you are and what it is you want to achieve. So what is it you do? What are your objectives? Who do you want to work with? And then trying to be consistent with that image when you interact online. I think someone mentioned it before, but try Googling yourself. Try to have a look at LinkedIn and Facebook. What are the pictures that come up? Is that really supporting the message that you want to distribute to potential employers or clients? Is that really telling the story you want to tell? And finally, when you feel really comfortable, don't just have like a passive profile, you can start creating content. And we were talking before about finding the medium that works for you. I've been experimenting a little bit with Facebook Live, which really works for me because I can't edit it afterwards. If I sit at home and do videos, every time I make a mistake, I have to re-record and it just takes hours. Whereas live, of course, just put it out there and it's there and it's authentic and you make mistakes and it's funny. If you love writing, then of course, blog posts and articles can be interesting, but don't force yourself to do something that you're not going to enjoy because you'll never stick to it. So I'd encourage you there to, when you leave, really think about what is your personal story. I am this person, this is what I want, and then how are you going to tell that story online? And the final one, and this one is icky for me, is the idea of networking, and I think we're better at it in Southern Europe. I have a Swedish-English background, I'm very cold and reserved, so it's harder to connect with other people. But ultimately it's just about talking to people, just being present, listening, understanding how you might be able to serve the other person, pay it forward, maybe they'll help you today, and you can help somebody else tomorrow. So, of course, we have the online networking, which is one way of doing it. We have the event here. So really think about what's the one thing that you need help with, and who can you talk to today that might help you? So are you interested in finding out more about VC investing, or do you need some marketing help about your social media strategy? Do you want to talk to a career coach? Do you need a connection with a business in a particular industry? Think about what you're actually hoping to get out of this scenario. And then we have a 2-hour lunch break now, so when you leave here, go out and find the person who's going to be able to help you. So those are the 5 things if you want to take a picture for later. I have a career coaching business, and I call it One Step Outside because there's this quote called outside your comfort zone. And of course, to grow, we need to challenge ourselves. We need to get out of our comfort zone, get out of the things that we feel are so natural to us, are so comfortable. And I'd encourage you to look at that list and really identify one thing, the one thing that makes you the most uncomfortable. So someone was telling me before, oh, I hate creating content, so that's maybe one thing that they can work on to do, and that's the thing that's going to really make a difference now going forwards. Or as I said, maybe you hate personal branding and you don't like that at all, but maybe have a look on your LinkedIn and at least see to make sure you're presenting the right kind of message there. Look at your business card, if you have business cards, look at your website, and think about the story that you're telling, and is that consistent with what you want to stand for. So, ultimately, as I said, I'd encourage you to really question those inherited beliefs and norms that we have around us. As I said, you don't have to tell other people what your definition is, you can keep it to yourself. I think at the beginning, when we're discovering this, it's nice to keep it to ourselves, but as we get more sort of confident and secure, and as we realise that it's really working for us, we'll get more open with telling that story. And be proactive. It's less about reacting to what's happening around you or playing a victim. It's really thinking how you can be intentional and proactive about going after that definition of success. And there's an Australian nurse called Bronnie Ware who wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And she spent lots of time with people who were terminally ill, and it was in their last days and weeks of life. And they had several regrets, very consistent actually, but the number one was that people regretted not having lived a life true to themselves and instead having listened too much to other people's expectations, to all those shoulds that we have in our heads. So of course we need to be realistic and pragmatic, we need to earn a certain amount of money, we have certain family obligations, but within your set of conditions, within that framework, what do you really want to get out of this life? Life is short, yes, it's a cliche, but it's true. And I think we have this opportunity to make a difference, as Miguel said, in fact, in the business world as well. We can choose not just to work on profit or smelling water, and we can try to make a real impact in the world. So I really encourage you to do that as you leave today. Thank you very much.